If you're looking at Intramuros from the perspective of history, it's one place where you could actually see the history of the Philippines as it unfolded. I see that Intramuros is an area which can embody the concept of reuse in urban planning. So just think of old structures being utilized in a modern sense. I think the challenge for us in IA is how can we recreate the former ambience so that people can relive history through Intramuros. And then that's where it becomes a site where we can educate people on the version of history according to the Filipinos. So I am Roberto Alabaro III, and currently I'm the Assistant Secretary for Tourism Development Planning. And it's fantastic to have an urban area, an old urban area, wherein maybe in our generation we can see this transformed into a more developed society where poverty will no longer exist within the walls of Intramuros.
Tira ako sa Basco Street, Intramuros, Manila. Doon ako nagkaroon ng isip. Dito ako nakita, dito ako lumaki. Ginagawa ko dito sa eskwela talyero, sa trabaho ko. Isa ako sa mga heritage protector, isa akong mason. Kita ko yung eskwela talyero na nagtitrain sila ng mga out of school dito. May kahit na high school graduate lang, pinasok ko. Tinitrain nila hanggang sa mahasa, tapos kinukuha din nila as worker din. Ako si Edsel Paul Mauhay, tumutulong para maibalik yung ganda ng Intramuros. Para mas maibaganda yung Intramuros para sa lahat.
Intramuros for me is, I would say, the soul of our country. My name is Paulo Mercado. I'm the founder and president of the Creative Economy Council of the Philippines. This is an advocacy group that we set up about 2 years ago to promote the creative industries, both in the public and private sector. So, yung concept of creative economy essentially is taking a look at the contribution of the totality of creative industries and creative individuals to the national economy. So, and our thrust is to get the government to recognize it as a priority strategic sector and support it with, let's say, incentives or from the private sector investments that would make it grow faster. So I wish for Intramuros in the near future to become the country's most iconic creative hub.
AMOSUP, Associated Marine Officers Seamen's Union of the Philippines. Ang AMSUP ay isang union ng mga seaman, exclusive lang sa kanila. Ang AMSUP members po namin ay nagagaling na iba't ibang lugar sa Pilipinas. Dito na lahat nagsama-sama. Puro mga seaman lahat mga yan. Dito sa ginagawa ko rito, ay na-assist ko po yung mga members namin, mga union members, kasi exclusive lang sa kanila para dito sa dormitory. Ang contribution ko sa Intramuros ay siguro pangalagahan itong lugar na ito. Ang Intramuros importante sa akin dahil dito ako nagtatrabaho at wala na po ibang mapuntahan na dahil sa edad natin, kaya importante sa akin ang Intramuros. Ako si Joel Carino, nagtatrabaho rito sa AMSUP. Ako ay bilang supervisor dito sa dormitory. Ako ay 16 years rito sa AMSUP sa Ilorsong. Ang may contribute ko rito sa Intramuros bilang isang empleyado, supervisor sa AMSUP, kailangan mapangalagaan yung mga member para sa kanilang contribution sa ating bansa.
Well, Intramuros for me is many things because my father used to work in the port area, in Beatification Drive in port area. So even as a small boy, I really knew Intramuros already back in the 50s. And I was very happy to have been appointed administrator in 1989. And that really involved me more with the history of Intramuros and the plans for its further development. It would be very important that we know where we came from, and I think that's the special value of Intramuros. But even in modern times, there could be or there should be, and as it's happening now, other developments here in Intramuros. I'm Jose Capistrano Jr., formerly administrator of Intramuros. Well, as what's happening now, Escuela Taller assists in the restoration of heritage structures through our training of out-of-school youth in the various arts and crafts of heritage restoration. And I think this is important to preserve our historical and heritage structures, and at the same time also reach out to other parts of the country for the same purpose.
Intramuros for me is a sense of curiosity and wonder. It's heritage and history, and it's a living experience. It's a place where you can see history come to life and where we believe there's a strong future for sustainable tourism. So bamboo is arguably one of the most sustainable building materials on the planet. We're using local Philippine bamboo that is then handcrafted into our products so that we can create jobs, but then also share a bit of Filipino design and flair with our international guests. We've been manufacturing bamboo bicycles. It is as part of a sustainable livelihood program. And here in Intramuros, we've been doing guided bamboo bike tours for now it's been about 5 years. And they get to ride the bamboo bikes around these historic walls. You can explore the nooks and crannies, the different chambers and gates and parks and buildings and museums and churches and everything. The different streets here all have something exploration worthy. Bambike helps you discover Intramuros like nothing else. So my name is Brian Benitez McClelland. I'm the founder of Bambike, and we're operating Bambike Eco Tours here in Intramuros. BAM Bike gets to help the guests experience Intramuros from a different perspective, sharing Philippine culture, our history, and the architecture and the stories of what really were the foundational years of Philippines here in Intramuros.
Ang Intramuros, isa sa pinakamahalagang lugar dito sa buong Pilipinas. Ito ay isa sa pinaka-historical place. Ay naitutulong ng isang kutsero ay may turo sa mga bawat namamasyal kung anong mahalagang lugar dito sa Intramuros. Mga rule ng mga kutsero ay kailangan panatili, malinis ang lugar, tapos mag-uniforme, sundin ang mga tuntunin ng Intramuros. Dito sa Intramuros, sana isang araw o bawat isang linggo, bigyan nila ng mga libre na mga lugar para lalong pasyalan ng mga mamamasyal dito sa Intramuros. Yung iba kasi namamasyal dito, hindi nakakapasok sa mga lugar-lugar kasi may mga bayan. Ako po pala si Romeo M. Javier, bilang isang kutsero at bilang isang tour guide sa Intramuros. Dito rin ako nabubuhay at nabubuhay ang aking pamilya. Kaya malaking tulong ang Intramuros sa buhay ng bawat isang kutsero dito.
When I started out with the Department of Tourism, we wanted the theme or to be the overarching theme to be a culture of sustainable tourism. And what's good with Intramuros administration is that we should preserve it because it's a historical and a cultural site. And Intramuros is what we can call one of our national treasures. And I want the Intramuros, the district of Intramuros, it's not where you go for field trips or weddings or photo shoots. It should be a place where everybody would like to go to enjoy the sights, and it's like a place where it's like going back in time. Intramuros is a place, I think, that a living urban heritage district. It's where you have history and culture come to life. I'm Bernadette Romulo Puyat. I'm the Secretary of Tourism and also the Chairperson of the Intramuros Administration. Intramuros should promote the cultures and values of Malasakit and Malikain.
I want to describe Intramuros as a juxtaposition. I like the fact that it is steeped in history, but I want it also steeped, through our project, it's going to be steeped into our future, our vision for the future for the Philippines. Growing up, we went to Intramuros. I remember watching a PETA play in Intramuros. And it was really quite memorable because with the backdrop of the Intramuros, the walls of Intramuros, it was really such a natural environment. So it was kind of like a complete experience of the play. Hi, I'm Ria Matute. I'm the Executive Director of Design Center of the Philippines. Design Center is a technical agency of the Department of Trade and Industry. We provide design services to Philippine micro, small, medium enterprises to improve its competitiveness in the local and the global market. I guess Design Center actually started partnering with the Intramuros administration primarily from the connection with Design Week Philippines, when Design Week Philippines identified the Intramuros area as a creative environment. From the very beginning, we saw the potential of Intramuros, not just from the historical point of view of the place and the significance, the historical significance of the place, but as well as how it can shape the future of the Philippines and how it can also become an iconic experience, not just of the past, but of the future of the Philippines as a country, as the Filipinos as a people.
So naging special sa akin yung Intramuros dahil dito rin ako nakatira, so dito na rin ako kumukuha para sa hanap buhay namin. And then ang Intramuros din para sa akin is parang isang tahanan na rin para sa akin. So ang role ko dito sa Intramuros ay parang tayo naging nag-a-attract or nagpapa-attract sa mga turista dito sa loob ng Intramuros para kahit pa paano makita rin nila yung kagandahan ng Intramuros. Ako nga pala si Valentino Mejia, isang e-trike driver dito sa Intramuros. So ang nakikita ko sa future ng Intramuros is lalawak pa yung ating turismo dito sa loob ng Intramuros, and then talagang makikilala ang Intramuros sa buong Pilipinas, hindi lang sa buong Pilipinas, sa buong mundo.
My memory of Intramuros was always during Holy Week. I think we come here around 4 or 5 a.m. because the Manila Cathedral will be full of people to join together in one community of prayer. And whenever we come to Intramuros, we really appreciate that story of our country, the story of our city, and maybe the stories also of many people who lived here before. This place for us priests is a very special place because this is where all of us could gather as one community, as one church here in Manila. My dream for Intramuros, that it will become a center of faith and even pilgrimage for many people around the world. I am Father Cali Liamado. I am currently the Vice Rector of the Manila Cathedral. By being young as a priest, I think it is my duty now to bring the church and the faith much closer to young people.
It represents our history. It contains a lot of traditions. It houses culture. It represents how we were or how we started as a nation. For me, it's a good place to be in because it represents my identity as a Filipino. It not only represents my profession or my advocacy, but it also represents the place where our trainees and graduates can further develop themselves. My name is Carmen Bettina Bulaong. You can call me Tina for short. I'm the Executive Director of Escuela Taller de Filipinas Foundation Incorporated, and I'm also a conservation architect. So, Escuela Taller is actually a foundation. It's a private non-profit foundation which runs a technical vocational school.
Okay, we shall start now. Thank you. Welcome everyone to the Intramuros Learning Sessions. This is our 43rd episode, and this is brought to you by the Intramuros Administration. And this is your host, Rancho Arcilla. Today we're going to talk about a saint in the Philippine Church, and our guest for today is an eminent historian who is the lead for the canonization movement for the saint, which is who is Lord Takayama. But before we start, let me first share some house rules. So for those who are attending via Zoom, you may raise your questions anytime via the Q&A button. And for those who are viewing via Facebook, you may raise your questions in the comment section below. Note that only those who have successfully registered and viewed on Zoom will be eligible to get a certificate, and a feedback form will be emailed to you after the session. The certificate will be sent within a week. And for those who are viewing via Facebook, feel free to register. You can still register now. Note that the webinar is recorded, and the recording shall be made permanently available in IA's social media channel. And joining us today is none other than Ernesto de Pedro. Ernie de Pedro is a historian, and he is presently the lead promoter for the canonization movement of Blessed Takayama in Manila. He has an MA and a Ph.D. in history from the University of Santo Tomas. While researching at the Vatican archives on Lord Takayama to confirm if he was indeed a real-life historical figure or merely a composite of several heroes, the archives director in the Vatican asked Dr. De Pedro, "What's the sudden interest in Takayama?" Doc Ernie said that there was a Takayama memorial in Manila since 1977 in Paco, but that nobody knew who Takayama was. After discussing what was known in Manila, the director asked him to return the next day. He had to consult other Jesuits, and when Doc Ernie returned, he was handed a large carton box of photocopied documents, all about Takayama, written in 5 languages across 350 years. He committed to translate the documents into English pro bono, and they give him the commission and involve him in the process, in the Vatican process. Doc Ernie, who is an ex-seminarian, leaped at a chance to handle the historical assignment. After the translation was submitted to the Vatican, Takayama was declared a servant of God in 1994, 364 years after the Archdiocese of Manila first proposed his sainthood in 1630, making Takayama the first Manileno to be elevated in the sainthood. De Pedro asked, what comes next after this? The Vatican said Philippine bishops should now promote the devotion to Takayama. And Doc Ernie thought that over and decided to incorporate a support movement to promote the Takayama cause until its successful conclusion. With altar statues of Takayama now installed in 34 churches in 6 countries worldwide, including in the Vatican, the movement has now been imparted an apostolic blessing by Pope Francis. And finally, if one miracle is produced through the intercession of Lord Takayama, the Japanese-born Manileno will finally be canonized as a saint. Now, without further ado, I'd like to call on Dr. Ernie De Pedro for the presentation. Dr. Ernie?
Sound okay?
Yes, sir. The sound is okay.
Okay. So, this is about Takayama in the context of Intramuros. When Takayama arrived here, he was fully 63 years old. But he lived only 44 days before dying. So it's quite possible to trace what he did during the 44 days that he was around. But first, we have to understand the context of Takayama and why he is important to us. I am frequently asked, is Takayama an honorary Filipino saint? In those days, there was no concept of Filipino nationhood. Either you were a local, you were Tigarito, or you were Banyaga. But Takayama, when he came, he was immediately accorded all the honors of citizenship. He was offered a pension. He was asked to lead an expedition back to Japan to protect persecuted Japanese Christians. And therefore, he figured in the first chapters of Labor Evangelica, the chapter on evangelization of the Philippines. He was, in that context, a Filipino, but it's safer to call him a Japanese-born Manileno. He came from Manila. He was a son of Manila. Okay. If we understand that well, we can proceed. Now, when Martin de Goiti, who was a marshal in the Legazpi expedition, pwede. Forward po. When Martin de Goiti arrived in Manila, he found 40 Japanese in Raja Sulaiman's palisaded fort. 2 of them were Christians. Therefore, the first Christians in Manila were Japanese and not the Spaniards. 2 of them were, the 2 were called Pablo and Anton. They approached Goiti asking for a spare rosary. That means they were not able to go to Mass. Obviously, there was not a priest until Goiti arrived, but they knew what the rosary meant. When Takayama arrived, he brought with him a boatload of 350 Catholics who were deported from Japan. They all refused to abjure their Catholic faith, and therefore, together with old missionaries in Japan, they were exiled to the Philippines. The boat that left Nagasaki port was loaded with 450 Catholics, but around the bend in Hirado port, 100 of them clambered down to go back to Japan. Many of these were missionaries. Some of them were sons of nobles who returned to their kingdoms. And what was left was 350 Catholics who joined Takayama to exile in the Philippines. They had a choice of going to either Macau, which was a Catholic Portuguese enclave, or to come to Manila, which was a Spanish enclave. They chose Manila because it was a far larger place and there was place to resettle. It was the Jesuits, not the Spanish government, who invited them to settle in the Philippines. Therefore, they were the guests of the Jesuit order, and the Jesuits had an encomienda, a district in San Miguel, which was an encomienda that belonged to the Quiapo Aris. Recognizing his rank in Japan as a daimyo, Governor General Silva accorded him military honors with a pass in review in front of the governor's palace. He told his men, march sharply, because this fellow was a samurai general. After the military honors, Takayama and the 300 repaired to the Manila Cathedral, which was Manila Cathedral number 3, made of stone. And there they sang the Te Deum, which is a hymn of thanksgiving for all Japanese Catholics. Why is that so? Because when the 26 martyrs of Nagasaki were forced marched from Osaka to Nagasaki, taking a month doing so, this was the thanksgiving hymn that they were singing in an endless loop. Thank God for your forgiveness, etc. On their first night, Takayama and all of them, except for the missionaries who had their own congregational accommodations, were accommodated at the PLM Jesuit compound. That is the center of the Jesuit order in the Philippines. This is where missionaries were sent to Japan. Then the next day, they were all accommodated in San Miguel, except for Takayama, who remained at the PLM campus. The group of Takayama represented a wave of persecuted Christians who came every year between January and March for the next 264 years. That's how strong the persecution against them was in Japan. So they got a skiff. Some of them were shipwrecked along Ilocos, along Cagayan or Agoo, La Union. But Manila was always the destination because they knew that if they reached San Miguel or Santa Ana or Paco, there was always a resettlement for them. Now, you may think that a resettlement in San Miguel was like Intramuros with the stone houses, 2 stories and all of that. No, these were nipa huts with no running water. This was in the middle of rice fields, owned and grown with rice by the Jesuits. During the voyage to Manila, and the voyage took 43 days, Takayama's stay was 44 days. During the 43 days, Takayama and his family, being relatively well-to-do, in contrast to the missionaries who were almost destitute, begged him to take care of the Marian image, La Hapona, in his cave. So this image of Mama Mary, which is now enshrined in Santo Domingo Church today, it was brought to Manila by Takayama. On Christmas Day, he brought this to the Santo Domingo Church in Intramuros. Takayama's family accompanied him to exile. They could have stayed home. They were not going to be persecuted, but their loyalty to him was constant. He brought his wife, Doña Hosta. Remember, his name is Hosto. The woman, the wife, was named Doña Hosta. A daughter, Lucia Yokoyama, and 5 grandsons, all surnamed Takayama, but their first names are not known. Upon settling down in Casa San Miguel, inside PLM Jesuit compound, Governor De Silva offered him a pension so that he could live very comfortably. But Takayama declined the royal pension because he said he could no longer render any military service to compensate for the pension to be given. Instead, he now occupied his time with evangelizing among the Japanese who were not yet Christians who lived in Paco. And after converting them, he would bring them to Paco Church, which was established in 1585 for baptism. There are no records there anymore because they were burned during the war. This is how Paco, how San Miguel district looks like. That is from a 18th century photograph of San Miguel district. Who were the people exiled to San Miguel district? They had a cloistered nunnery, meaning 13 nuns of the Beatas of Mijaco were there with their own church and their own cloistered convent. You had the sons and daughters of Japanese nobles, like the son of Daimyo Omura. You had 100 young catechists as well as seminarians who pursued their priestly studies in San Jose Seminary in Intramuros, also inside the PLM compound. As Takayama was well known for being a builder of castles in Japan, as well as fortifications and moats, he was asked to inspect Fort Santiago and the World City. And he advised Governor Silva on the vulnerabilities of the place against any outside attack. But two major incidents occurred during his 44 days stay. First is Hideyori, who was ranged against Tokugawa in a fight to the finish, sent a delegation to Manila to entice Takayama to lead the Western Army in its fight against Tokugawa's Eastern Army. Takayama met them at the garden of San Agustin Church, which is still there today. Takayama said, no, he was done with all fighting. He was not going to go to battle anymore. The second military offer to him was made by Governor Silva, who asked him to lead a military expedition to Japan to protect Japanese Christians from persecution. And Takayama asked how many he could send to Japan. Silva said around 600. Takayama simply was too polite to laugh because in the battles in Japan, they had armies of 240,000 versus an opposing army of another 200,000. And here, Silva was proposing to send 600 Spaniards to Japan. But Silva demonstrated one Spanish soldier is worth 10 Japanese soldiers. Of course, Takayama said, you don't know what the samurai is all about. To indicate that he was done with all wars, Takayama presented his samurai swords to the Franciscans who were known as friars, men of peace, unlike the Jesuits who were all ex-military. Saint Ignatius ex-military, Saint Francis was ex-military. The friars of the Franciscan orders were begging missionaries. They had a begging bowl in hand, ulam dyan, like Buddhists. While he was here in Manila, he was asked by Japan-bound missionaries to share with them, an idea of Japanese culture. So he taught them the graces, he taught them what language they need to learn, and he taught them the final points of the tea ceremony. It was Takayama who was credited with incorporating elements of the Christian Mass in the celebration of the tea ceremony. Takayama made it a point to attend Mass in all the Intramuros churches, and that is 6 of them, not yet 7. And also Paco Church, where he brought his converts to baptism, and also San Miguel Church, which is where the other Japanese Catholic expatriates were living. But after 44 days sojourn in Manila, Takayama, at 63, died on February 3, 1615. Today is the 406th anniversary of that death. As befitted his rank, funeral masses were held in 6 Intramuros churches. Some of the homilies delivered during those funeral masses are still extant today. But the only Intramuros church that's still extant today is San Agustin Church, which, though it had suffered some damage, is still basically the same structure as it was during Takayama's time. Then, A state funeral was decreed for the Japan-born Manileno, recognizing him as an honored citizen of Manila. Before he was buried in Santa Ana Church inside the Pamantasan ng Maynila compound, a finger was cut off. They do not mention which finger, but the intention was to bury this part of Takayama on Japanese soil. And it was Mrs. Takayama who was dispatched to bring it back to Japan. She finally managed to do this in June 1616, which is about 16 months after the death of Takayama. I visited the place in Kanazawa where this finger was buried. It's still there. Despite the persecutions across 3 centuries, nobody thought of destroying the cross marker that was there. It shows you how Takayama was very well revered in Kanazawa. Now, Takayama was buried in the Pamantasan ng Manila from 1615 to 1899. In 1899, his remains were transferred to San Ignacio Church, which was built in 1899. It remained there till 1945, when the church was burned during the battle for the liberation of Manila. Takayama had many books written about him during his lifetime. There are 6 biographies about him during his lifetime. And after he died, the first book about him in Spanish was published in Mexico City. Versions of this were written in Italian in Rome, and then another Spanish version in Barcelona. But the first one in English was published in 1619, 4 years after he died. This is what I obtained from Oxford University. When I read this biography, I felt competent enough to lecture on the life of Takayama, because it was written by his father confessor, Father Pedro Morejon, and his father confessor, to whom he confessed all his sins, was sanguine enough to believe that this guy was a saint. In 1630, when Morejon came back from Macau, where he was rector of the Jesuit ministry there, wrote a petition which was forwarded by the Manila Archbishop to the Vatican, proposing that Takayama be made the first Manila Catholic to be a saint. In 1899, Takayama's bones were transferred from the Pamantasan ng Manila to San Ignacio, San Ignacio Church number 2, to serve as number 1 altar stone for the main altar, and the rest of his bones were kept in an underground crypt. But in February 1945, during the battle for Manila, the entire church was burned down. It took 4 days to burn down, but the crypts underground were not destroyed because they were under a cement floor under the main altar. In 1945, all the bones at the crypt of San Ignacio, which were supposed to contain the remains of Jesuit superiors as well as two Japanese saints, Lord Takayama and Lord Naito, were all transferred to the Jesuit cemetery in Novaliches. This is where in 2012, a delegation from Japan led by a bishop televised the opening of the two crypts involved to find out which ones were the bones of Takayama. They brought sampler bones back to Japan for DNA analysis. But 6 months later, they said that these were bones of Caucasians, not any Asians. In 1977, the city of Manila sought to beatify Plaza Dilao. Among the several plans was a Japanese Friendship Park, which chose among three candidates which statue to place them. The candidates were General Ricarte, a symbol of Philippine-Japanese friendship. The other was President Quirino, who forgave 203 Japanese convicts at Muntinlupa and sent them back to Japan in a presidential pardon. And the third was Takayama. The Japanese said, we don't know too much about Takayama, but we would prefer Takayama so that we can develop him further. In 1992, 15 years after the Takayama Memorial was installed, the National Historical Commission declared the Takayama Memorial as a national monument under its protection. Therefore, it didn't belong to the city of Manila. It didn't belong to the Japanese embassy. It didn't belong to, it belonged now into the care of the National Historical Commission, and it is listed as such in the master list. Now, by the time that I had completed writing the positio for Takayama and sending it to Japan, to the Vatican, within 3 months, the Vatican recognized Takayama as a servant of God, which is the first step towards sainthood. The 4 steps are servant of God, venerable, blessed, which is now the stage of Takayama, and 4th, sainthood. If he gets a miracle today, in 5 years' time, he will be Saint Takayama of Manila. In 2016, Pope Francis, studying the records of Takayama, issued a decree saying that Takayama was not a confessor, but a martyr. In the Catholic Church, there are 2 types of saints. One is a confessor, and the other type is martyr. A confessor is like, let's say, Venerable Camomot or Venerable Versosa. They live their entire life as confessors, while a martyr is like Saint Lorenzo Ruiz or Saint Pedro Calongson. They died, and whatever were their past, it did not matter. The moment of death, of their martyrdom, was the important point to study. In February 7, 2017, that's 3 years ago, Takayama was declared blessed by the Vatican. In the beatification rites, presided by Cardinal Amati, was Manila Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. He was the only other cardinal invited to the affair. because the Japanese recognized that Takayama was a Philippine-Japanese saint. In Manila, they focused on him as a hero, as an epitome of Japanese nobility. The Manila City Hall adopted a resolution declaring December 21, the day of his arrival, as Blessed Takayama Ukon Day. This is a working holiday, of course, but the symbolism is there. The Japanese Embassy, Intramuros Administration, the Takayama Foundation, and the City Hall are involved in this yearly celebration. On July 25, 2019, after reviewing the progress and development of Takayama's cause, Pope Francis imparted his apostolic blessing to our support group called Prayer Warriors of Blessed Takayama. We are waiting for one validating miracle before he becomes a saint. Now, give me all the questions you need.
Thank you, Dr. De Pedro, for that very interesting presentation. We are now going to proceed with our question time. So for those who are viewing via Zoom, you can raise your questions in the Q&A button below your screen. And for those who are viewing via Facebook, you can raise your questions in the comment section of the live feed. Now, before we start, sir, how exactly did your interest in Takayama start? And when was the first time that you encountered him?
Actually, for many years, I was passing by the Takayama monument every time I went to my office. I didn't know who he was. But a Japanese delegation came. Of course, they had the usual sites. San Agustin Church, Manila Cathedral, all those tourist destinations. They had the Tinikling in Philippine Plaza, things like that. But when they went to the Takayama Memorial, they didn't know who he was. So I was asked to make a brochure in Japanese that could be given to all Japanese pilgrims. I could not find the first thing about Takayama. But it was rumored that he was proposed to be a saint. I tracked that down. At that time, there was no Google yet. You could not research anywhere. It was not in the books. I opened Blair and Robertson. I have the entire volume in my library, and I could not find Takayama. But then I came across Justo Takayama. And in the footnote, it was mentioned that he died in Manila. That was my clue that this fellow was not named Takayama in Manila, but all the time that he was in Manila, he was called Justo Takayama. With that, I formed a study group of Japanese mostly. Nobody of them Catholic, Protestant Japanese, because the Protestant Christians in Japan are more vigorous than the Japanese Christians. Japanese Catholics. And we said, let's amass, collect information, what we can gather about him. Then I was told at the Ateneo that they had a book, Labor Evangelica, whose first 4 chapters were about Takayama and the group that he brought to Manila. Therefore, he was a part of the missionary evangelization of the Philippines. With that, I said, I think I better go to the Vatican to check what this is all about. A Japanese financed my trip, and since there is a Pontifico Colegio Filipino there, I asked for a letter from Manila Cathedral for accommodation, and they gave me permission to stay there as long as I needed to research. When I reached the archives and talk about Takayama, they told me they could not open the records to me unless I was a philologist. I didn't know what philologist was. There was no dictionary to consult. But I guess he was saying an expert on languages. So I remonstrated with the director and said, if there are documents of Takayama, they can be written only in Latin, which I understand because I went to seminary. I studied years of Latin. And the other one is Spanish, which is a compulsory subject in the Philippines. And I was talking about Takayama. The postulator general of Takayama, in charge of the Takayama cause, was listening to our conversation. He said, Takayama? You mean Takayama of Japan? I said, yes, I'm looking for papers about it. I'm not interested in the sainthood. I'm interested in the historical facts. That's all you make, the papers will be about sainthood. I will extract his battles and his life. Okay. So they decided, come tomorrow, and that's when they made me this offer. If you can translate this all into English, we will, for free, walang bayad, we will bring you into the loop and bring you into the process. I said, wow, that's my redemption. This is my Damascus moment. Pwede na. And my puzzlement, and that is the gracia as far as I'm concerned, my puzzlement is, I did not come from Ateneo, which is Jesuit. I do not come from any Jesuit background. I was not yet enrolled in UST. I studied in a Divine Word College. But why did he remember that there was an Ateneo, there was a Sophia University, there's a Gonzaga University, there's a Fordham University? He could have gotten scholars from any of these Jesuit universities for the translation. And it was my suerte to pick it up. So I brought it home with me. And the first miracle happened in Hong Kong when I was carrying the big cartoon. I was going up the spiral case, which was very narrow. And there was a delegation of 20 Japanese tourists who were following my behind. And since I could have got very fast, the tour guide who had a banner in his hand tapped me and said, let me bring it up. So he brought it up the spiral staircase. And when he handed back to me, he said, sir, may I know your name so I can properly thank you? He pointed at his chest plate. He said, Nakayama. I said, malapit na rin. That's his first name. I told my wife, no, coincidence. Nakayama, Takayama, Wakayama. These are all Japanese surnames.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Doc Ernie. I was actually wondering about the Japanese exiles who settled in Manila, who came with Takayama. How were they able to find new life in their new country? And what sort of occupation did they pursue after they arrived? I mean, there are 350 of them. So one can assume that they did something to start anew. So do you have any idea on what the kind of occupation they did after arriving here?
Japanese bazaars.
Bazaars.
Yes.
They operated bazaars in
the San Marcelino area.
Oh, so they operated shops.
Yes, for sale alongside Tagalog shops.
And what sort of products did they sell?
It was not mentioned. Probably umbrellas, parasols, and that sort of stuff. But I don't know.
Okay, sir. Thank you for that. And I understand that daimyos in Japan had castles So when Takayama's titles were forfeited and he was expelled from Japan, what happened to his estate?
His first castle was Takatsuki. That was constructed before he became daimyo there, and it was deeded over to his successor. So that was not destroyed. But today, it's in ruins now. The second castle was in Akashi, which he built with his own funds. But he held the castle for only 2 years. If you Google the history of Akashi, their history shows that it was built anew 15 years later. So it must have been destroyed when he was dispossessed of it. Those are the two castles. He built for the Maedas Takaoka Castle and another castle farther north. Those things were destroyed when the Tokugawa shogunate imposed a one castle per daimyo basis. Before they could build 2 or 3 in strategic places. Now, because of the security system of Japan, each daimyo had only one main castle. That's it.
Sir, when he arrived in Manila, did he arrive completely penniless or did he have some wealth with him?
He had gold nuggets in his possession. Because when he said goodbye to Lord Maeda expected a fight against expulsion. So Maeda thought that he was going to battle the Maeda forces. But what he did was to surrender his compensation for that year in gold, which Maeda accepted, but he kept those for prior years where he had rendered service. And he also tried to surrender his tea utensils, bowl, whiskers, etc. But which was declined because obviously the Lord Maeda at that time was not a tea fan. So he had wealth coming in.
So, and all of this is written in the Labor Evangelica.
Yeah.
Okay. This is related to the question earlier. This is from Violeta Munoz. What happened to regarding the 350 Catholics who arrived with Takayama? Did they intermarry the natives or did they stay within their community?
The history of the 13 nuns is documented up to the day they died. So yeah, you can remove that from our narrative. Okay. There were 100 catechists and seminarians. Some of them went back to Japan after they were ordained at San Jose Seminary, which today is in Ateneo compound. Okay. What they call them, Josefinos. Some of them became martyrs and are blessed up to this day. Okay. The others intermarried. Now, why is it easy for them to intermarry? Because as baptized Catholics, they use Portuguese or Spanish surnames, Jacobo de la Cruz. When your name is Jacobo de la Cruz, I mean, who can tell whether you are Japanese or Tagalog at the time? Unlike the Chinese who kept their 3-syllable names, Tan Lai Ku, Go Ko Lai, Ko Huang Ko. I mean, you know that they are Chinese all the way through, although their names are Christian names, Walter, Rancho, whatever.
And in the process of integration with the natives, do we have any information on what languages Takayama and his companions spoke? Suzuki Kobayashi asks, what language did Takayama speak in Manila?
Portuguese and Spanish. Remember, Takayama served at Mass and he knew Latin well. Mm-hmm. He ran a seminary, so he was listening to the Latin lessons for the Japanese. Among the seminarians in Takayama Seminary was Saint Paul Miki, who was crucified in Nagasaki in 1597, one of the 26 martyrs. But his first foreign language was actually Portuguese because of the Jesuit missionaries there. But also because Father Morejon was Spaniard, also Spanish. Spanish and Portuguese are cousins, so that's not a problem.
And I suppose he also learned Latin.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
And in his prayers, for example, when he recited the Rosary, what language did he recite it in? Was it in Latin or was it in Portuguese?
It was in Latin.
Latin. Right. Thank you for that. We have a question from John Paul Villera. Is there a connection between Takayama and the Beritero de Miyako of Sister Julia Niato? Are you familiar with this, sir?
Yes.
Is there a connection?
They were on the same exile ship together. Takayama was not the only ex-daimyo arrived in the Philippines. There were two of them. One was Takayama, and then the other was Lord John Naito. Naito brought his family with him, including his sister, Mother Julia Naito, who was the Mother Superior of the Beatas of Kyoto, okay, which was resettled in San Miguel district. Okay, so Mother Naito lived a long, long time. Her biography is in Labora Evangelica. So in that sense, they knew each other. But since these were cloistered nuns, they had a grill through which you may not pass. In fact, the Beatas of Kyoto did not attend his funeral because they were praying for him in San Miguel cloister.
Sir, regarding his geographical designation, what is more correct, Takayama of Japan or Takayama of Manila?
Today, Takayama of Manila.
Takayama of Manila.
Because of Pope Francis. In the Catholic Church, there is a rubric. There's a rule that says, where you die is where you are born to heaven. Now, that means to say that if you die in Manila, that's where the angels took you upstairs or whatever. Okay. So, you know, Mother Teresa, not of Albania, where she came from, but of Kolkata, where she died. You remember Padre Pio from Petrelcina, which is where he died. You know, those are the rules of geography. So as far as Pope Francis is concerned, it's easier to narrate that Takayama is Blessed Takayama of Manila. What about San Lorenzo Ruiz? He died in Nagasaki. He should be called San Lorenzo Ruiz of Nagasaki. Yes, that is correct. But the Philippines not having its own saint ever until San Lorenzo Ruiz came, made a petition. Please second Lorenzo Ruiz to Manila. So he is now known worldwide as San Lorenzo de Manila. I mean, these are the Vatican politics.
Related to that, we have a question from Eric Apedono. So given the very short time he spent in Manila, which was only 44 days, and one could imagine that he wasn't able to fully integrate with the community, can he really be considered a Manileno?
What else would it be? He's from Kanazawa, he's from Nagasaki. Choose your city. He's from Takatsuki, he's from Osaka. I mean, well, you say Takayama of Osaka.
Okay.
I mean, he died in Manila. Whether it was 3 days only or 44 days, he was Takayama of Manila.
Thank you for that, sir. Okay. Do you have any contemporaneous depiction of Manila, of Takayama? Are there any extant written records on what he really looked like? I mean, we have a lot of paintings and illustrations of Takayama, but do we really know what he looked like?
I don't think that you know what he looked like. You don't know what St. Peter looked like. You don't know what St. Paul's looked like. It is the artist's imagination. They look for the parameters. He had the beard, he had the, things like that. And Takayama is now identified with a palm of martyrdom with this top knot as an ex-daimyo and with a sword crucifix to show that he was both a Christian warlord and a Christian evangelizer. Nobody knew what he looked like. But when he died in Intramuros, the Archbishop of Manila commissioned a large painting made of him as he lay in his state. We have been trying to trace that in the archives where it could be, but the paintings at San Agustin were burned during the war. Although some large paintings are still in San Agustin today, but nobody has been able to trace those.
You mentioned, sir, earlier that he died of a tropical illness.
Yes.
Jose Capistrano asks, what exactly is the cause of his death? I mean, do we have any information on what this tropical illness is?
Probably the mosquitoes in Intramuros were different from the mosquitoes in Japan. That's the guess among us students who studied that. But I have to point out, Takayama died. This is number one. 7 Jesuits missionaries who were with him in his exile voyage died in the same year. 7. I have the names of all 7 and the years they died. Meaning to say, it was a grueling voyage they endured. Why? Because Nagasaki to Manila in a normal year is supposed to take only 20 days. With the typhoon and all of that, the main mast snapped into 2. They were adrift in Bataan for 3 days. And we cannot imagine what the food provision was for 20 days. I mean, did they have enough to feed themselves for 44 days? Nobody knows. So the hardship then affected Takayama and the 7 Jesuits. I don't know about the 2 Dominicans and the 4 Franciscans who did, because they would have archives for these things. But as far as the Jesuits are concerned, 7 of them died. Same year. One of them died during the voyage.
He died during the voyage because of
hardship.
Seasickness, hardship.
Yeah, hardship, basically.
He died because of hardship. Okay.
Yeah.
Sir, we have another question. Sir, where is the main shrine of Takayama?
Today?
Yes, today.
It's in the Osaka Cathedral.
Oh, so the Osaka Cathedral is his main shrine?
I mean, for the Japanese.
Okay.
For us here, it's Paco Church.
Oh, I see. So here in the Philippines, his main shrine is in Paco Church. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Maybe I can accommodate only another question. We have a question from Margot Kamaya. So, was there any form of persecution against the Japanese in Manila by the Spaniards, similar to what they did to the Chinese? Or was the treatment more friendly with the Japanese?
More respectful. Because every Japanese guy in town had a katana and a short sword. And in the expeditions of the Spaniards, whether into Cambodia or to the to Moluccas, the Japanese were willing mercenaries, meaning to say, okay, you are the captain, we are ready to be your soldiers. So the Spaniards had this enduring respect for their discipline. In fact, during the massacre of 20,000 Chinese, whom they pursued up to San Pablo City, it was the Japanese who did the spade work.
Okay. Thank you everyone for raising your questions. We still have a lot of questions actually, but we are running out of time. So we're keeping our ILS under an hour. But before we end this Q&A, one last question, sir. For those who would like to pursue this topic further, what reading materials would you like to recommend to us?
I have a website. It's called takayamaukon.com. I place there, when I hear of questions and I can answer them, I place the answers there. I've been maintaining that for 2 years now, so you can read all about Takayama, or all that I know about Takayama.
Sir, do you have a Facebook page?
Yes. Blessed Takayama, Justo Takayama Ukon.
Okay. So everyone is invited to like the Facebook page, Blessed Takayama Ukon. Thank you, sir, for that. And now, I'd like to encourage everyone to follow us. The Intramuros administration is available in Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we're also available in YouTube. For those who missed our episode or for those who came in late, you can go to our YouTube channel because this episode is recorded and we're going to upload this later. So feel free to hit that subscribe button. And I'd also like to promote our page in the Google Arts and Culture. So just key in Intramuros Administration. Right. Sir, would you like to say some final words before we end this episode?
No, just one. Please pray for an international associate miracle. A miracle from COVID, a miracle from cancer, and any healing miracle.
Yes.
But the technique is, don't say like most Filipinos do. You want to pray to all the saints in heaven and all the angels, including this new guy, Takayama. That's not the way to pray for a miracle. You concentrate on Takayama only. Ikaw ang karga niya. Because if you include all the others, the Vatican will not accept it as a valid miracle.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Doc Ernie. And thank you everyone who stayed tuned with us in our 43rd episode of the Intramuros Learning Sessions. Till next time po, and thank you again. Thank you, sir.